God, we come before you this morning, and I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts will be pleasing in your sight. Be our rock, be our Redeemer. Amen. So I am Allison. I was a seminary intern here in 2008, which seems both like a long time ago and not that long ago. I have been a hospice chaplain in Central Virginia for about 14 months now. And before that, I was a hospital chaplain. I come to you today out of a place that is perhaps a little selfish. In the course of my work, I have become increasingly alarmed by the stance of the people of God toward death and toward illness. It's an adversarial stance. And this is alarming to me. A quick aside, when I was growing up in my Southern Baptist church, not particularly far from here, there was a skit that they would do every year. And this skit included a youth group who would board a bus to go to youth camp. You know about that sort of thing. And rather than making it to camp, for some reason which goes unexplained in the skit, the bus ends up in heaven because they have all died. And they, one by one, they go over to the pearly gates, and they give St. Peter their name, and they're admitted into heaven, and everybody cheers, woo, cheer. And the last one goes up, and they say, their name, and St. Peter says, "Get out, we don't know you." Pretty serious stuff. And the purpose of this skit, year after year after year, was to scare me, you, anybody who was present, generic audience member, scare you because you might not be saved. Jesus could call you home any minute and you might not be saved. This is not the purpose of my sermon. Let's get clear on that. I'm not here to talk about your salvation. I'm not strictly certain what that means. But I am here to talk to you about when Jesus calls you home. And that we will save for a minute from you.
We continue to remember in our prayer, too, that Jesus has recently called home Warren Tadlock's mother. And then we learned yesterday that our former minister of music, Debbie Kidd, that her mother had passed. We continue to read this story about Jesus and the sisters and Lazarus. When Jesus finally arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and she met him while Mary stayed at home. And Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and she called her sister Mary and told her privately, The teacher is here, and he's calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. And they followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. I mean, what else would they think? When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews also who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? And then Jesus again, greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. And Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go.
So, back to this Southern Baptist church in which I grew up. Now, this is a story of a miracle. Yes, a miracle. Jesus shows up and he heals Lazarus. He brings him back from the dead. And we could leave it there. We could expound on it even. If you had been there, my brother would not have died. Now, just a little trip into my world. I spend about 8 hours a day, give or take, 5 days a week, talking to people about God. Now, sometimes I talk about fishing, and sometimes I talk about football, and sometimes I talk about God, but mostly I talk about God. And I've learned a few things. First of all, most people want to die in their sleep. And not now. Sometime way on out there. They don't want to know it's coming. They just want to go to bed one night and not wake up in the morning. That would be lovely. That's my plan as well. But it's probably not going to happen. Not for most of us. The people I talk to, they believe in God. They believe that God can heal them. I mean, this story talks about it. It talks about people Jesus has healed in the past, and it talks about healing. Some people think that they have to pray for an unqualified miracle, complete healing. Some people believe they have to pray for a limited miracle. Jesus, I just want to be able to walk to my mailbox. That's all I want. Not asking for much. Can't ask too much. We see in today's scripture a little bit of this. We see that Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus that Lazarus was sick, we see that when he gets there, they say, now if you had been here, he would not have died. But now that he's dead, we can't do anything about it. Lord, if you had been here. Lord, he stinks. You can't do anything about it once he stinks. Lord, he's stinking. Jesus had never done this before. I mean, the commentators I read really harped on that. This was not something Jesus did every day. He healed him from the dead. He brought him back to life. This miracle did not look like what they expected. No? It looked different. Sometimes we don't get what we expect. Did you also notice that Jesus kind of hung around in Bethany, or before he came to Bethany? He didn't hurry right on down. He moved at his own pace. He did things in his own time. This is pretty common in the Gospel of John. Everything comes in Jesus' time. It didn't come when it was expected. Sometimes what we expect, it just doesn't happen when we expect it. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. Sometimes things look different. Now, that could be the end of this sermon, right there. You're looking for a miracle. It might not look like what you want it to look like. It might not come when you want it to come. But here's the thing. That's not the end of the story. Lazarus is raised from the dead. But I've never heard about Lazarus continuing to walk around. I've never seen Lazarus. So I am led to believe as a human being that at some point, and particularly as a chaplain, at some point, Lazarus got sick again. And that time, Jesus didn't show up in the way that he shows up here. And Lazarus, he died. So even if we love Jesus, and even if Jesus loves us, and even if everybody we care about loves Jesus and prays for us, sometimes we still die. Oh wait, not sometimes. We still die. So I'm sorry to bring you face to face with your own mortality this lovely Sunday morning. Sorry. It's got to be done. We as Christians cannot walk around believing, and I don't know how Christians walk around believing this anyway, so here goes. That if we believe the right things, and if we say the right things, and if we do the right things, that everything is going to be peachy. Crap happens. It does. So no matter what, we're going to die. Even if Jesus loves you best. So what's the point? Thanks, Allison. You brought us down to the basement. The point is where Jesus goes in this passage. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. I am the light. Sorry, the life. This is a different passage. Those who believe in me, even though they die, they will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. I am. God says back in Moses, I am that I am. He's calling on his divine authority. I am. The resurrection. I am the life. Jesus is speaking to the fact that in him lies both our death and our life. He's got it. And he's with us through both of those things. So, those who believe in me, even though they die, they will live. So this is Jesus talking about what happens when we come to the end of our lives. Jesus speaking to the way that we, as believers in him, approach death. Death, for those who believe, is not the end. It is a transition. Now, I'm not good at transitions. I'm a person who does not like change. If you are with me, that is okay. It's really scary, and it's icky, and it's terrible when things change. But it's not the end. We've been promised that the end is not so bad. Jesus has been there. We talk about this at Easter. Jesus dies on the cross, and he goes and he comes back, right? He resurrects. We know that Jesus has been there. And so Jesus will be with us there in the dying and the whatever. And I have to trust, as a person who believes in Jesus, even though sometimes it's really scary, that Jesus wants what's good for me, and that when I die, it will be okay. I don't know what it's going to look like. Don't ask me. I've never been there. I don't know. But it's going to be okay. So, this is how we're supposed to do. Believing that even though we're dying, we're going to live in the whatever. Like I said, don't ask me. I don't know. I'm not saying, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you can't be sad about death. We've talked about folks who've lost loved ones lately. You can be sad about your own death. You can be sad about the death of the person that you love. It stinks. It's icky. It's awful. And in this passage, Jesus is deeply moved by the death of Lazarus. Some even say he was angry. Some of the commentators say he was angry. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad when somebody dies. I'm not saying that's not okay. It's okay to be sad when a piece of part of you dies. I mean, these folks that I spend all my time with, they've lost some piece of themselves to illness. You know, they can't work anymore, and that was their identity. They can't cross-stitch anymore because they've lost their eyesight. I mean, that's a death in its own way. It's okay to be sad about that, too. But if we believe, it's not the end. The passage goes on. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Now wait a minute, Jesus. You just said even though they die. So what are you saying? Now they don't die? Why must Jesus be so confusing? I do not know. So we go back to the top. We've talked about the resurrection and checked that off. We've talked about what? Oh no, we haven't talked about the life. Okay. So this piece, this everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. We're talking about how we are to live. Not how we go about, brushing our teeth and all of that. We're talking about truly living. Jesus is the life. If we believe in him, our lives are to be transformed. Think about it. We're followers of Christ. We've been shown how to live. Jesus tells us, love your neighbor as yourself. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. We have a purpose. And simply by living in the way that Jesus taught us and in the way that Jesus spoke of here, we can have a legacy. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be like Jesus and have a legacy like Jesus. I'm not saying we're going to start a new religion and that people are going to still remember us in 2,000 years. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe I'm wrong. But we can make an impact such that the world is a different place when we leave than it was when we came in. So maybe that when we do die, we're not gone. We're just dead. Maybe you have children. Maybe that's your legacy. Maybe you teach. Maybe that's your legacy. Maybe you plant trees. That's a legacy. I don't know what you do, but do it such that you leave a legacy. People come to me sometimes after I've spent time with them and they say, that thing you said, it made the difference. Most of the time, I do not remember what it was. But it mattered to them. So what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? What matters to you at the end? Who do you want to look back and see that you have been? And who do you want those left behind to remember you as? Do you want to be the Scroogey old man down the block? Do you want to be... Now, granted, everyone is the sweetest thing at the end of their life because that's what everybody says about them. But do you want them to mean that? You know, she was just the sweetest thing. When I met her, she was a bear. That's okay. That's okay. Do you want to really have been the sweetest thing? Do you want to, my great-grandmother, she was not the sweetest thing, but she was a good example to me on how to be a lady who doesn't take crap. So what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to leave behind? Jesus goes on to say, do you believe this? This which I am telling you. The question that I want to ask my hospice patients and never do because it's not very pastoral is, do you believe it? Do you believe this? Do you believe in what Jesus has promised you? Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? This is not a question of salvation. This is a question about how you live. Do you believe that those who, even though they die, will live? And do you believe that those who live and believe will never die? Again, this is not about salvation. People sometimes ask me how to get saved. This is a really awkward question for me. In my job. My job as a hospice chaplain is to help people be comfortable with what they believe, not to tell them what to believe. My job is to make sure that what they believe fulfills them, prepares them for what they are facing now, helps them cope with what has happened before, and prepares them for what they will face. That's my job. So when somebody asks me to save them, I'm kind of at a loss. And I say, what do you think? That's the side of the board. It's not about believing the right thing. It's about having the tools to deal with what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen. It's about having what you need, that this is okay, whatever this is. Now, maybe this is not the sermon that you needed today. Maybe it's the sermon that you're going to need later. And that's okay. So remember, when whatever it is, this bad thing, which will eventually happen to you, I'm very sorry. And when you may be dying, which you will, I promise, remember, Jesus got it, and it's okay. If Jesus is the resurrection and the life, if Jesus is with us in death, and if Jesus is with us in what lies beyond death, and if Jesus is with us in what we do every single day, it's not that scary. It's okay.